The British Parliament is right now deciding whether to go to early elections. Is December 9th the date? We'll take you live to London with the latest on Brexit. A new phase for the impeachment battle against Donald Trump is about to begin as the House hears from a current White House official who listened in on that July 25 phone call between Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart. We'll be live in Los Angeles. And some of Brazil's top soccer stars are here in Israel following a soccer game in Israel's north. We'll take you there. Hello, I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for joining me. Some of Brazil's most well-known soccer players are here in the region with a match known as a peace game about to wrap up in Haifa in Israel's north. The Brazilian team playing an Israeli side with organisers hoping the message of peace can reach all corners of the globe. And our correspondent Alec Pollard is there at the game standing by. Alec, it looks like an amazing atmosphere there behind you. So many people have turned out to come and watch this game. Give us a bit of a rundown on what's happened there so far tonight.
Yes, well, it's the final minutes of this very special friendly match between the veterans of Israel and the Brazilian soccer veterans. We're talking about great names, legendary names in the soccer world. Ronaldinho, Cafu, Kaká, Roberto Carlos, Rivaldo, practically the entire team that won the 2002 World Cup, considered one of the greatest World Cup teams of all time. Over here, the score is currently 3-2 to Brazil, so it's been an entertaining match with a lot of goals, and these players here are held in so much reverence that twice the match had to be stopped because fans burst onto the pitch, ran onto the grass. Why? To get a selfie with Ronaldinho. So that just shows how much the fans here love these players. Even the referees twice took selfies with the Brazilian players. So these players are absolute legends, and them coming here to Israel has brought a lot of excitement to the people here in Haifa.
Alec Pollard there in Haifa, really appreciate the update. Have a good time. Thank you. And we are seeing live images coming in from the British Parliament with members of Parliament voting just a short while ago for an early election. That will be, of course, December 12. And this, of course, is still an ongoing story, and we will take you live to London very shortly. But for now, let's go to a developing story out of Lebanon, and Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri has stepped down from his position following weeks of mass protests over the country's dire economic state and general unhappiness with the government. Hariri making the announcement on television in an extremely short address, which went for just 2 minutes. And for more on this story, let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Nathaniel Shiraki. Nathaniel, thank you so much for joining me. Tell me, is this resignation a real setback for Hariri or more of a strategic move?
Well, judging by the enthusiasm of the street after the announcement of this resignation and the fireworks and the dances, it's clearly a victory for the street, so not so much a victory for Hariri, but it still can be nicely played. As you said, it could be a strategic move. Why? Because over the 48 hours within the cabinet of Hariri, between him and his opponents, mainly Hezbollah, the Amal movement for the Shia parties, and the movement of Michel Aoun, the president of Lebanon, there were a lot of tensions because those two movements, the two opponents to Hariri, didn't want a government resignation. So by resigning against the will of the president, against the will of the Hezbollah, he nicely puts them on the side of the anti-protesters and himself on the side of the protesters, on the side of the people.
And the protests that we've been seeing there in Lebanon have been massive. Hundreds of thousands of people coming out on a scale which hasn't been seen before. Tell me, is this development, how is it expected to have an effect on these protests?
Well, it's probably not going to stop them, and Hariri knows it. It's not a government that calls for the resignation of the prime minister, not even the government. It calls for a systemic change. A structural critique is being made in the heart of Lebanon on this fundamentally sectarian and deeply corrupt system. So this is the question that's at the heart of those protests. where to go, how far to push it, how much of a revolution it should be. And the impact of this resignation on this question really depends on what's going to happen now. There are three possible scenarios. The first one is that Harry will stay as Prime Minister, but just to expedite, just to manage day-to-day affairs of the state. The second scenario is that actually Michel Aoun and the Hezbollah will propose a new Prime Minister, a Sunni one, but loyal to Hezbollah, and that could endanger the protesters, and it could generate in a confrontation between the street and the government. So it's probably the worst option. The third option is how like we saw in 2015 after the protest, a technocratic government of non-affiliated personalities that would rule the country and potentially give the time to the civil society to organize itself, structure itself, and propose potentially a new political offer.
Really, though, Nathaniel, how much of a chance does Lebanon have at reforming its political system in depth?
Well, that's certainly what the protesters want. But even in the last scenario that I just outlined, which is probably the best one for the protesters, there are two factors that show that it's not just a domestic and political issue that the Lebanese can deal with themselves. There is first the economic and international economic factor. The international markets, reason on a very short-term basis. That is probably not going to have the patience to wait for Lebanon to complete a full revolutionary cycle. And the economic collapse of Lebanon, if it happens, will be the end of this movement. So that's the first factor. The second one is the international one, of course, with the two big players in the Middle East that are Iran and Saudi Arabia, likely to play a spoiling role in those protests, trying to manipulate the coming chaos, and that also would make this movement change its own nature and be the end of it.
Well, it certainly is a lot happening there in Lebanon. Nathaniel Shiraki, always a pleasure having you in the studio. Thank you so much. A new Syria is unfolding, with Russia and Turkey enjoying more power than ever in the wake of President Trump's surprise move to pull troops out earlier this month. Those two countries have made a deal to work together, and now, as defence correspondent Daniel Semak reports, the new phase has begun.
Turkey and Russia have started patrolling a 6-mile strip of the Syrian border near Turkey. The ceasefire reached a week ago by Turkey and Russia has expired. President Erdogan saying that Russia informed Ankara that there was a complete withdrawal of Kurdish forces from the area. The expiration of the ceasefire has again been interrupted by bursts of violence. Hours before the deadline, heavy clashes breaking out between Syrian regime forces and Turkish troops for the first time since the agreement was reached. The Syrian Human Rights Observatory reporting 6 Syrian soldiers killed south of Ras Al-Ain. And more violence broke out along Syria's border with Turkey. According to Sana news agency, several civilians were injured by Turkish mortar fire as Russian forces were making their way to the area to meet with Turkish troops due to begin their joint patrol. But even with the ceasefire over and a new phase beginning, the instability keeps breaking the quiet, and the ground is ripe for further confrontation.
Now, as the world reacts to the death of one of the most dangerous and most wanted terrorists on the planet, ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the US has now confirmed that its military has killed his likely successor. President Donald Trump taking to Twitter, writing, "Just confirmed that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's #1 replacement has been terminated by American troops. Most likely would have taken the top spot." Now, it's still unclear who this person is, although the US is confirming that high-ranking ISIS figure Abu al-Hassan al-Mahir has also been killed during a military operation. And impeachment proceedings are underway in Washington as investigators hear from a White House official for the first time. We'll go live to our correspondent in Los Angeles right after this break. Stay with us.
Whether you're just getting out of bed or starting your day, or you're already hard at work, we cut through the clutter to give you the right dose. Breaking news and top headlines from Israel, the Middle East, and around the world. Politics, pop culture, sports, and music. We track the big stories from the heart of the Middle East. Brace yourself for your daily dose of news.
Strictly Security, your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts, analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, only on i24 News.
Welcome back. French President Emmanuel Macron has given a speech inaugurating the European Judaism Centre in Paris. Now, the space was opened as a place of exchange and boasts a 600-seat synagogue and an exhibition centre. Macron said this centre is an act of faith in the future. It comes amid a broader fight against rising anti-Semitism in France, the country with the largest Jewish population in Western Europe and one with a painful story for Jews during the Holocaust. i24 News was there and asked the French president what he thinks about French Jews making Aliyah to Israel.
I respect everyone's decision, but of course I tell French Jews that they have a place in France, a historic and a current place. We are bonded, and their departure from France is an amputation to the Republic and its values.
Let's go now to the ongoing Brexit drama in the United Kingdom, and the UK Parliament has rejected the Labour Party's amendment to move the date to Monday, December 9. It was defeated by 315 votes to 295, meaning the government favours December 12. Now, this comes amid ongoing Brexit chaos. Earlier, the leader of the European Union, Donald Tusk, announcing that there may be no more Brexit extensions after the bloc formally approved another extension to the end of January 2020. And to bring us up to speed on everything Brexit, let's bring in our UK correspondent, Jonathan Sacherdotty, who is standing by there in London. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. An evening of very important votes in the House of Commons. Run us through what is happening right now.
Sarah, to viewers who aren't used to this sort of thing, it might all look a bit strange. How long can it take to decide whether or not to have a general election, you might wonder. But this is British parliamentary politics on fast forward, because Boris Johnson yesterday tried to bring about a general election under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, but that required a 2/3 majority vote in the Commons, and he didn't get it, mostly because the Labour Party voted against it. Today, they voted for exactly the same thing, but put through a different parliamentary procedure, which was to bring about an early general election on exactly the same date, December the 12th. But under this methodology, only a simple majority was needed, not a 2/3 majority. and amendments could be put in. So the amendment that we just saw rejected was Jeremy Corbyn's own amendment to move the date from the 12th of December to the 9th. Again, you would wonder what difference those few days could make, but there were arguments both sides for the preferred dates of either party, and the House has come down in favour of the government's preference, which is the 12th of December. Right now, the floor of the House of Commons is filling up again after everyone left the room to vote in the two chambers, yeses and nos. This is a vote on the third reading of the bill, which has now not been amended with that 9th of December voting date. It's still the 12th of December. And now, if it gets through this vote, this is pretty much good news for Boris Johnson. It means the election is more or less confirmed, but it will then go into the House of Lords.
So, Jonathan, tell me, why are we seeing such a big backflip from the Labor Party regarding these early elections?
Well, certainly that's a good question. There are several ways to answer it. One is to say that possibly the Labour Party felt somewhat isolated and maybe like it was getting bad press for having objected in the first place to the general election. After all, isn't it the role of an opposition party to want to win an election and form a new government? That's certainly what Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said to them over and over again. Eventually, yesterday, they were really the only opposition party general election. Seemed to them not to be a very good tagline. So possibly that is what has swung them this way now.
Jonathan, Sasha Doty there in London, thank you so much for the update. And we will come back to you a little later on in this bulletin when the vote is being read live. Thanks so much. In Washington, a new phase for the impeachment battle about to begin. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has set the first formal vote on the impeachment process for this Thursday. Now, that announcement coming as members of Congress for the first time hear from a current White House official who listened in on that July 25 phone call between President Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart. More in the next report.
Wearing his full military dress uniform, Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman arrived on Capitol Hill before heading into his closed-door deposition. According to his opening statement obtained by ABC News, Vindman will testify he was so concerned by what he heard on the call between President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky that he feared it would undermine U.S. national security. Vindman, who sits on the President's National Security Council as a top Ukraine expert, is the first White House official who listened in on that call to testify. The accusation is that President Trump was pressing the new Ukrainian leader to launch investigations into the 2016 election interference and into Joe Biden and his son. Already, President Trump on the attack, calling the decorated combat veteran a never-Trumper in a tweet and questioning how he could be concerned. Was he on the same call I was on? A sentiment echoed by presidential allies.
We've had the two people on the call, President Trump and President Zelensky, say there was no pressure, no one was pushed, no conditions whatsoever.
But it wasn't just the call. Vindman was also troubled by comments made by Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. Vindman is expected to say that during a meeting in the weeks before the call, Sondland started to speak about Ukraine delivering specific investigations in order to secure a meeting with the president. I stated to Ambassador Sondland that his statements were inappropriate, that the request to investigate Biden and his son had nothing to do with national security.
And for more on this developing story, let's bring in our senior national correspondent, Michael Shaw, who is standing by in LA. Michael, thanks for joining me. Firstly, tell us about who's testifying on Capitol Hill today and what can we expect?
Well, you know, Sarah, it's nice to see you. The Alexander Vindman testimony is important because this is really the first person who was actually on that call, someone who is really in the room or the virtual room of what has been reported. And because he then went to his superiors and said that there's something wrong with this, there's something amiss here, his testimony is valuable to those on the Intelligence Committee who are looking into this, especially as they are starting to get ready now to draw up articles of impeachment. It's testimony like this coming from someone who is, you know, they look at as nonpartisan, somebody who is part of the military, part of the security apparatus, somebody who can look at this and say what is wrong and right. It's a very important day in terms of getting this kind of testimony from someone so close to what happened there, Sarah.
And Michael, we know that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced in a letter to her colleagues that there'll be a House vote on Thursday. Tell us, what is this all about?
It's a formality, but it's an important formality. They are voting now on moving ahead with impeachment, and it sounds as if they've been doing that now for months, looking into this impeachment. But formalizing it, getting together what those articles will look like, formalizing who in fact will be heading the different committees looking into it and who will be responsible. It seems that Adam Schiff will be the one, the chair of the Intelligence Committee, through whom all of these articles will pass, and then it goes to the other committees from judiciary to oversight, etc. So it's going to be a little while before we know exactly how that's going to happen. But when the House formally says we are having an impeachment inquiry, it also makes it easier to schedule those hearings and then try and, as the Democrats would like to do, get this done before the end of the year, get it to the Senate if in fact they're going to pass out of the Senate, so that the Senate can start their consideration before the holidays and before the actual election year begins, Sarah.
And Michael, we've heard a lot from the president regarding these impeachment proceedings. Tell me, what is US President Donald Trump's strategy going forward?
You know, his strategy, it seems so far, Sarah, and there is now somebody in place who's going to be overseeing that. But the strategy going forward seems to be that they are going to attack the process rather than the content. And generally, in historic and precedental terms, when you attack the process, it means that you're not confident about the content. It's too early to say there. But they've said that the Democrats are doing this in a cloak and dagger way, that they're not sharing information, that a lot of this is happening in closed session, so that people can't be, apprised of what's going on there. The Republicans have complained about that from the beginning. The truth is, though, they're saying that they want to make sure they bring these witnesses in so that they can speak without fear and without knowing what other witnesses have said if they're going to be corroborating evidence. It's almost like when you see a suspect questioned in one room and their accomplices questioned in another room, so that they can get their stories, make sure that they haven't been prearranged. And that's what is going on right now. So the White House and Donald Trump, of course, dismissing this as partisan, but they're attacking the process more than what has been learned from that process, Sarah.
Well, Michael, it certainly is going to be very, very interesting to see what comes out of this one. Thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure. Social media giant Facebook is once again in the headlines, this time suing an Israeli NGO, saying it hacked messaging platform WhatsApp earlier this year. Now, it's alleging that the hacking targeted journalists, diplomats and human rights activists, with the lawsuit filed in San Francisco. Now, Facebook wants that the NGO banned from suing WhatsApp and Facebook, and is seeking unspecified damages. So far, no comment on the issue from that NGO. And let's go back now live to the UK. We'll bring in our UK correspondent, Jonathan Sashadotti, for the very latest there on Brexit. Jonathan, we are seeing these live images coming in from the British Parliament right now. Tell me, what exactly is going on?
Well, Sarah, we've been hoping perhaps to bring the result of this vote. Still a few minutes left, perhaps until the Commons chamber fills up fully again, and the tellers, as they are known, will be seen in front of the desk there giving the result. This will be the result of the vote on whether or not to have a general election early on December the 12th. That's been voted on already this evening, but this will be the sort of definitive final vote after the attempted amendments and the like. This will mean that the business of the bill will have gone through the House of Commons, and then it will go tomorrow to the House of Lords, Britain's unelected second chamber of Parliament. They're not expected to pose many problems.
Jonathan, I'm going to cut you off here. Let's go live now to Parliament for the result on this vote.
The ayes to the right, 438. The noes to the left, 20. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Colleagues, we come now to the intended business statement by the Lord President of the Council and the Leader of the House, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg. I beg the right honourable gentleman's pardon. The honourable lady had signalled a desire, if the right honourable gentleman will forgive me, to raise a point of order, which she can do briefly. Point of order, Liz Savile-Roberts.
Today's vote lays down precedent which overrides the Fixed Term Parliament Act, thus overriding one of Parliament's checks and balances against excessive executive power. Could he advise, please, how to protect democracy in this place?
And Jonathan, we've just seen that third reading pass there. Walk us through what this means.
Well, there we go. This is something of a historic moment in the House of Commons. That is a huge majority, 438 yes and 20 no votes. So a majority of 418, the biggest majority Boris Johnson has won in the House of Commons since becoming Prime Minister. In fact, one of the only votes he's won, and that is to hold a new general election, which might see him out of office. That's certainly what Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, will be hoping for. And certainly entering into an election at this critical moment in the Brexit process is not a simple or risk-free strategy. Mr Johnson will be hoping he'll be returned to government and as Prime Minister with a bigger majority allowing him to push things through. The Liberal Democrats will be hoping, perhaps against the odds, to be returned into power themselves, the third party, but standing against Brexit altogether, promising to revoke Article 50. And Labour are standing in the election to renegotiate the deal and then hold a referendum on their deal.
Certainly all happening there in Britain. Jonathan Sashadotti, thank you. And that is all we have time for this edition. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.